Shalom, everyone. It's Rabbi Alan. So this week, I'm going to do things a little different because, as I said last week, we are not on the regular cycle of Torah portions. And as you know, every week I relate our Torah portion to the Messiah, to Yeshua, to the body of Messiah, and to God the Father. But this week, because it is Passover week, we have a special reading, and it's from the book of Exodus. So I decided to actually talk about something a little bit different this week. And I want to tell you, actually, this is sort of some information that I presented in a message over 10 years ago at Kol Mashiach. Most of you know that after 30 years, I retired from being the rabbi at Kol Mashiach Messianic Synagogue, and I retired the end of September of 2019. And so I was thinking about this a few weeks ago that I'd like to talk about this. I never really had a chance to talk about it again after I did this so many years ago. And so this morning I'm going to take a few minutes to just talk about this. And I think it's a question that many people have thought about over the years. And if you never realized you thought about it when I mentioned it, then maybe you'll go, oh yeah, I wonder why. So did you ever wonder why God chose 10 plagues to perform against Egypt and Pharaoh? And why he chose those plagues and in the order that he chose those plagues? I mean, he didn't just say, I think maybe I'm going to make a plague of bringing frogs or bringing flies or killing the firstborn, and I'll just do it randomly. Well, he didn't. And the point I'm making today is, it's that God is in control, and he did this for a very specific reason. So let me tell you. First of all, I want to read from Exodus, and I'm just going to read one verse here, and this is giving us the little bit of a hint. From Exodus 12:12. And God said that I'm going to pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt, and I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Okay, so that's from the Torah. Now also let me mention that we just, a few nights ago, we all had our Passover Seders, and we all read from a Haggadah, one of the Haggadahs. This is the Haggadah that we have used for well over 30 years at Kol Mashiach. This is the one that I use at home. This is the Maxwell House Haggadah. And it's a very traditional Haggadah. And I want to read a few lines here from the Haggadah. And this is what it said. God said that I will pass through the land of Egypt, I myself and not an angel, and I will smite every firstborn, I myself and not a seraph. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment, I myself and not a messenger, I the eternal, I am he and none other. And then I want to go just a few pages later, and this is where we get that wonderful opportunity to sing Dayenu, and we list all of the wonderful things that God did for the Jewish people. And after each line, we say it would have been enough, Dayenu. Well, right after that, this is what God says. He says, because the Lord, blessed be he, passed over the houses of our ancestors in Egypt. And it says, if he had led us into the land of Egypt and then not built the temple, it would have been sufficient. Dayenu. And right before that, he says, if he had inflicted judgment on them and had not executed judgment upon their gods, Dayenu. Okay, why do I bring these up? Because we see this not only in the Torah, but a few times in our Haggadah. that one of the reasons that God executed the plagues was to execute it against the gods and goddesses of Egypt. He wanted to show Pharaoh and the Egyptians and to show the Jewish people that he was supreme, that he was stronger than all of the gods and goddesses of the world. And so what I'm going to do is take a few minutes and I'm going to list those 10 plagues and I'm going to let you see those gods and goddesses. Now, let me tell you, this is low tech. You know, when I was at the synagogue, we used to do high tech. We had PowerPoint, we had a big screen, we used to superimpose the pictures. Well, I'm at my house right now. It's real low tech. I don't even know how to put in the pictures while I'm talking. So I'm going to do it low tech and you'll see what I mean. Don't laugh at me, please. Don't judge. But you'll get the idea and I'll give you this way you'll have an understanding of what God is doing. So we're going to look at the 10 plagues. And so they were not random. God did them for a reason and in a specific order. So here are the plagues. First of all, let me mention there were 10 plagues. And the number 10 in numerology is represented by the Yud, the little thing that looks like an apostrophe. The Yud is the smallest Hebrew letter, yet the Yud symbolizes the hand of God. And so by executing 10 plagues, he was showing God's might, and he was showing Egypt and Pharaoh and the people of Israel, he was showing the mighty hand of God. And so here we have the plagues. The first plague was the water turning to blood. There was a god, Hapi was the Egyptian god of the Nile. And they used to pray to the god Hapi every year that the Nile would be flooded and that they would have sufficient water for the crops. And so God wanted to show Egypt and Pharaoh that he was greater than Hapi, the god of the Nile. And here I have a picture of, here's a picture of Hapi. If you see there, if you noticed, the god of water, the god of the Nile, he was always depicted as rowing or boating down the river Nile. And that's why the first plague was the water turning to blood. The second one was the frogs coming out of the Nile River and going all through the land. Well, the goddess of fertility and of water and renewal was Heket, the goddess of fertility, water, and renewal. And he was showing his might over the goddess Heket by bringing frogs out of the water onto the land. And let me show you. I've got a picture here just to show you in my low-tech version. Here is a picture of Heket. And if you notice, let's see. Oh, there she is. If you notice, she has the head of a frog because she was a goddess that didn't have a human head. She had the head of a frog. And so God, bringing the frogs out of the Nile, was showing his might over the goddess Heket. All right, we're going to move on. The third plague was the lice coming from the dust of the earth. There was a god, Geb, the god of the earth. And so God had the lice coming out of the dust of the earth. And the Egyptians used to pray to this god, Geb, so that he would allow the crops to grow. And so God wanted to show his power and might over the Egyptian god Geb. Let me show, we got a picture here of him. Here we go. All right. Okay, so the fourth plague was God brought the swarms of flies all throughout the land of Egypt. There was a God, it was the God of creation, the God of movement of the sun, and the God of birth, and his name was Kepri. And Kepri, it's interesting because here's a picture that we have, and if you Google these, you could see the pictures here. If you notice, he was, if you look really carefully here, he had not a human head, but he had the god of a beetle. And so, because he was the god of flies and of flying insects and of beetles. And so God showed his might by bringing swarms of flies to the land. And that was the fourth plague. The fifth plague was the death of the cattle and all of the livestock. And the Egyptians had a goddess, and the goddess was Hathor, Hathor, and she was the goddess of love and protection. Now, on its own, we would think, love and protection, what's the connection here? That God, as the plague, had the livestock all killed. They would die. Well, here's a picture. Let's see if I can show it. Here you go. Here's a picture of the goddess Hathor. If you notice, she doesn't have a human head. She had the head of a cow. Once again, God was showing Egypt and Pharaoh and the Jewish people that he was greater than the goddess Hathor. That was the fifth plague. The sixth plague was that God caused boils and burns to come on the skins of the Egyptians. Boils and sores on their skin. Well, what was he doing? What was he showing the great might here? He was showing that he was greater than the goddess Isis. And Isis was the goddess of healing. And so here is a picture, and Isis is always depicted with having wings. If you think about, and that the wings were the wings of healing. If you can think about the symbol for modern medicine today, many times they show on the symbol two wings there. So God was saying, your goddess is the goddess of healing and health, and I'm going to bring sores and boils to the skin of the Egyptians. That was the sixth plague. The seventh plague, God had hail rain down in the form of fire from the skies. And so there was an Egyptian goddess. Her name was Nut. And Nut was the goddess of the sky. And here is a picture that we have of the goddess Nut, if you can see. And here she is blue. And you can see that she's always depicted as being draped over the people. And the reason is because she was the goddess of the sky. And so what God did was he had the skies rain down with hail in the form of fire. Again saying, hey everyone, I want you to know I am greater than your goddess. And so now we have the 8th plague. And the 8th plague was the locust coming from the sky. And the locust came and they ate all of the crops of Egypt. And so the god of the Egyptians was the god Seth. He was the god of storms and disorder and chaos. And so certainly he was showing his might when he brought this great chaos of the locust coming from the skies. And the chaos was that the locust ate all the vegetation. Imagine they didn't have the vegetables and the food that they needed. I think we can relate to that now, because of what's going on with the pandemic situation here. It's a little bit hard because you can't go to the grocery store and supermarket every day, and you have to watch what you're eating at home. And oh my goodness, we're out of vegetables and we're out of fruits. Well, can you imagine the chaos that was going on in their homes, in the entire country of Egypt, because the locusts were in such great numbers, they devoured all of the vegetation. So God was showing his great might against the Egyptian Seth. And so now we come to God showing his might as we get to number 10 of the plagues. 3 days of complete darkness. And we know that the biggie god of Egypt was the god Ra. And Ra was the sun god. And so God was showing his power and might over the sun god by blocking the sun for 3 entire days. So they were in total darkness. Let me show you. I got a picture of Ra, the sun god, right here, if you can see. There he is. And I want to point something out to you, and I want to just sort of go on a little bit of a tangent here. He always is depicted with a globe or a sun or a circle over his head that symbolizes the sun, because he is the sun god. And Ra was really the major god of all the gods and goddesses, not only of Egypt, but of the entire idol world. And so in different cultures, Ra was called different things, but it was always the sun god. And I want to show you something. And I've talked about this before in the past, but we need to realize as believers that when Constantine brought his council together in the 14th century, he created a new Christianity. He did away basically with Messianic Judaism. He tried to. And he created a new Christianity that integrated paganism and true Christianity. And the problem is that paganism was brought into Christianity, and there are still remnants of it today. Now, why do I say that? Because I want to show something. If we remember pictures of Yeshua, as what who the church calls Jesus, we see all these pictures of Jesus from the Middle Ages. And we see them depicted, we always see him depicted, and many times we even see the disciples, and sometimes we see Miriam, his mother, depicted with a circle around his head, in the back of his head. Let me show you a picture here. Let's see if we can, here's, got a few pictures here. Here's one, and here's one. These are pictures that we would see so often of Yeshua with a circle in back, or a globe, or the sun, if you will, in back of his head. Many times today, people will say, oh, that's a halo around his head. It's not a halo. It's the sun in back of his head. Why? How did this start? Because when they took paganism and melded it with Christianity, they wanted people, when they would worship the Lord, and they would look at these pictures or statues of Yeshua, in reality, what they were doing was they were not praying to him and worshiping him, but they were worshiping and praying to the sun god, Ra, that was depicted directly in back of his head. Okay, so let's go on here. That's the 9th plague, 3 days of darkness. Culminating in the 10th plague, which was the death of the firstborn. And why was that? Because Pharaoh was considered to be the son, or the firstborn, of Ra, the sun god. And so God was showing his great might even against Pharaoh. The firstborn that they believed was the firstborn and the son of the god Ra. And so they said, the firstborn will die that do not have the blood of the Passover lamb on their doorposts. And so we see that God showed in this number of 10, the hand of God, against the gods and goddesses of Egypt, because our God is the great and mighty and living God. And so we're going to leave it right at that for you. Thanks for watching today. Just to let you know, in a few days, I'm going to do an extra video, a Passover video, and we'll post it. And it's going to be about, actually about the Passover itself, and a little about the Haggadah. And I'd like to present that to you in a few days. Thanks for watching. Please share this with friends and family. And until next time, shalom from Rabbi Alan.